listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome to GM Shuffle. The GM Shuffle is presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. I am Geoff Schwartz, 8-year NFL veteran. Alongside me for the football season and beyond is Marty Hurney, former Carolina Panthers general manager, Washington Commanders executive VP of player personnel and advisor, and more importantly than everyone else, and maybe just to me though, Marty is who drafted me to the National Football League as the Carolina Panthers general manager. Marty, I'm very excited to talk ball with you. We'll be on twice a week. We'll be on Mondays and Thursdays starting next week as we head to week 1 of the National Football League regular season. And this can be a lot of fun, bud.
Yeah, it is. I'm looking forward to it, Geoff. You know, it's funny, 14, 15 years ago, I don't think either one of us could have said we're going to be doing a podcast together. I'm not even sure podcasts existed back then, but it's funny how this works, isn't it?
It is funny. That was 2008. And
Yes.
Today we will talk about Shedeur Sanders, we'll talk about Micah Parsons, we'll talk about the cut downs that are happening from your perspective as a former general manager, from my perspective as a player going through it. But you mentioned the draft. I will tell you a draft story very quickly about my draft day. I've never told you this before. I've told other people that it's been out there before. So 2008, there were 2 days of the draft. It was rounds 1 and 2 was one day on Saturday, and then rounds 3 through 7 were on Sunday. And I sort of had a realistic expectation, Marty, of where I'd be drafted. I thought I'd be drafted between round 4 and round 6. Sort of where I thought. I really didn't think I'd be a 4th rounder, but probably 5th or 6th rounder, right? So if you recall that year, there were, I believe, 10 offensive tackles taken in the first 2 rounds. It was a big offensive tackles year. You drafted Jeff Otah in the first round, but there were like eight in the first round, 2 in the second round. So I thought to myself, you know what? I'm getting pushed up the draft board. I didn't know any better. I'm like, yeah, I'm going in the 3rd round. It's going to be a better day than I thought it was going to be. Learning eventually that means that there's going to be a big void in offensive tackles drafted the next couple of rounds. But I didn't know more. I didn't know any better. So I told myself, I'm going to wake up in the morning on Sunday and watch the draft. Even though I was told not to watch the draft, I'm going to do it anyways, Marty. I get up in the morning, 6 a.m. on the West Coast, my parents' house. I go in the futon in the guest room, turn the draft on. I watch round 3 and round 4. Nothing happens. I'm like, okay, all right. So round 5, I start getting phone calls from different personnel around the NFL, including Dave Magazoo, former Panthers offensive line coach.
Yes.
And he calls me and says, hey, man, like we're thinking about taking you in the 5th round. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then so other people called, personnel directors and scouts, and hey, man, we're going to draft you. Just stay close to your phone. And I realized that in the end, that was to butter me up for undrafted free agent deals. I didn't know that at the time, but I figured it out eventually. So 5th round, nothing. And now I'm starting to get pissed. Okay, I'm walking around the house. I'm going outside to take a break. I'm just like over the entire day. Thinking I'm getting calls the 6th round. Hey, man, like be near your phone. We're gonna draft you soon. We like you a lot. It's between you and someone else. Like that's always the story, right?
Yeah.
And 7th round, I'm sitting there, and the Panthers call. And I believe it was Brandon Beane, now general manager of the Buffalo Bills, who was in charge of making the phone calls. And he calls me, Marty, and he says, are you ready to be drafted? And that was something like, are you happy to be drafted? You ready? And I said, that's what I said. I said, at this point, I don't even care. That's what I said to Brandon Beane. And he said, congratulations, you're a Carolina Panther. That is my entrance into the National Football League. I had a deal done with the Giants as undrafted free agent. I was going to New York.
Yeah.
I was about 11 picks, I think, away from the end of that draft. And of course, over the moon happy I got drafted by the Panthers. But in that moment, Marty, I was done with the draft. And that's my first introduction to the Carolina Panthers, was telling them I didn't want to be drafted by the Panthers.
Geoff, how many stories you think are like that? How many players have those stories? I mean, it's the biggest day in your life, isn't it? And, for somebody to tell you not to watch it, I think is a little unrealistic. I mean, I would have had to watch it too, and Dave Magazoo, he was in our ear from the 4th round on, right? So Dave never gave up, and he really liked this. So, and it just shows, I mean, what a great fit. John Fox wanted to run the ball. Dave Magazoo is a big physical offensive lineman guy, and you just fit the mold perfectly for us.
It ended up working out well. I'm very glad I ended up being Carolina. I still live in Charlotte, as do you. And so we'll be able to share some of these stories throughout the process. But what I want to get to starting off here is really it's driving me nuts, Marty. It's driving me absolutely crazy. The talk about Shedeur Sanders, the discourse around the 5th round draft pick for the Cleveland Browns. And the way that training camp is structured when it comes to reps, the way coaches approach preseason, the way front offices help the coaches kind of design how they want to evaluate these players. So Sanders plays, he played game 1 against the Carolina Panthers and played well. He played up to what I thought was his standard, did not play game 2, and then played the end of game 3, okay? And in game 3, the Browns played Flacco first. Kenny Pickett's been hurt. He did not play. Then Dylan Gabriel played, and then Sanders played. And Sanders did not play well. And some of the issues we saw in college showed up on his NFL tape in game 3, which just happens. He's a 5th-round pick. It happens. But the discourse around this idea that the Browns sabotaging him or did not give him the proper resources to be good or compete in the NFL is really frustrating because it's not the way it works. And teams are not sabotaging quarterbacks in training camp to make anyone look good or pump themselves up or not. Can I talk us through the Sanders draft and then how you would have approached sort of training camp and how the Browns ended up doing it?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm like you. It was very natural progression as far as Shedeur Sanders' playing time, and he had an oblique too after that first game. So we don't know how much that bothered him in practice. But I think this is what happens, Geoff, when you don't have a franchise quarterback. Young quarterbacks provide hope for the franchise, right? Because you're not winning consistently in this league without one. And I think that, with all the other hype that came in with Shedeur Sanders being Deion's son and all the improvement and excitement they created in Colorado, I think that everybody kind of wanted to see him go, and he represented some hope. Dylan Gabriel, 3rd round, good quarterback, but not the name of Shedeur Sanders. So now everybody's looking for conspiracy theories, right? I was talking to you before the show, and I just, not knowing anything, but just being in NFL draft rooms for 30-some years, when they showed the Browns draft room after they announced the pick of Shedeur Sanders, there was no excitement there. I said, God, something's wrong. It really didn't look like there was agreement in that draft room to take him, especially after taking a quarterback in the 3rd round. You normally don't see 2 quarterbacks taken like that. Especially when they had Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett on the roster. But at the end of the day, there is no franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. They took a shot on Deshaun Watson. It didn't work out. Everybody's looking for that ray of hope, that guy who can be the franchise quarterback. And here's a guy who came in with a lot of hype, Deion Sanders' son. Everybody's anxious to see him. And I thought he had a chance. I mean, I went there twice in 2023, and I think he's got combination of athleticism and accuracy that I think he has a shot. But as you say, he's a 5th-round pick, and it's going to take time.
So when Gabriel was and Sanders drafted in the 5th round, what has to happen for Sanders to overtake him on the depth chart? Because obviously reps as a rookie are determined by draft slot, as I think they should be. And so, what has to happen for Sanders to definitively overtake Gabriel? Because I feel like people just assume off the first preseason game that Sanders was just going to overtake him. And I kept making the point, I think it's very valid. Like, Gabriel, to me, is a guy that's always going to be good in practice. Like, that's just the type of player he is. I watched him at Oregon. Throw every ball. I've talked to coaches there. He's going to be good. He's not going to be bad enough to be overtaken by Sanders after one preseason game. How does that process work from your perspective on was it need for Sanders to go ahead of Gabriel at some point during training camp?
Well, what we see is preseason games, Geoff, but a big part of it is how you are in the meeting room. How are you picking up mentally? Every little thing you do is evaluated. So it's just not practice. It's just not games, especially now with these practices with other teams during the week. I mean, you see a lot of veterans don't even play in preseason games, and that does give the younger guys more of a chance to play. But I think that it's the whole puzzle that you have to figure out with a quarterback. And a big part of it is how he's picking up things mentally.
Yeah, well, obviously that's something that we just don't know because we're not in the building. Marty,
Exactly.
you hit on something. I am so pro playing starters in the preseason. I don't get why teams don't do it. You see Andy Reid comes out and plays Mahomes 3 drives in game 3. Why don't these coaches play their young guys? Why don't they play their quarterbacks? Guys don't get hurt as often in the preseason as we think. To me, getting those reps is important. Not a whole game, but a drive or two mentally, physically, emotionally gets you ready for the regular season.
I agree with you. I think, Geoff, what a lot of coaches feel is after they dropped the fourth preseason game, all these teams went into practices with other teams. And I think they're using that as a substitute. I don't agree with it. I'm like you. I mean, I would like to see the starters play 2 or 3 series at least in the first quarter. If you don't want to do it the last game, do it the second game. But I think that you need those reps and you need the game experience. But I think a lot of coaches have replaced the preseason game experience with these practices with other teams.
What do you those practices though are scripted? They're not a real game situation. How much can you take away from a joint practice? I had one in my career. They weren't really a part of my career. I don't know how many you had at Washington, but did you get a lot from those practices?
Um, a little bit, not much. I mean, and you can't hit the quarterback. Man, I mean, that's the main reason the coaches like playing quarterbacks there instead of in the game because they don't have to worry about them getting hit. But you're right. I mean, you can't replace the game day experience. You can't replace all the quick decisions you have to make and just the physical contact. But injuries are such a big part of the preseason. People are just scared of putting guys out there and getting one of your star players hurt.
Quickly, what is the end result for Sanders here? Does he just start the season as the second backup, third backup? What do you think the Browns do with him?
Well, I think the key to that is what happens to Kenny Pickett here. I mean, they obviously Flacco's their starter. Everybody knew it. Stefanski kept saying he hadn't made a decision. That decision was made. You knew Flacco was going to be the starter. Now, is Kenny Pickett going to be the backup? If he's not, you probably keep Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders as 2 and 3. But it really is going to depend on what they do with Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's Flacco 1 and then some combination of the young guys 2 and 3. And I think at some point this year, maybe all those guys play with the Browns' record and schedule and just sort of what they're trying to accomplish. I could see Flacco playing some, Gabriel getting some action, Sanders getting some action. And we'll talk more about how rosters are being constructed at the moment. It's cut down day. There's trades. There's things happening in these buildings. We'll pick Marty's brain about this soon. Back in a second.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We're back on the GM Shuffle. It is that time of year that is difficult for everyone involved. It is cut down time for the rosters. It's a Monday, August 25th today. The preseason is completed now, and so cuts are beginning as teams get their rosters and trim them down to, is it still 53 now, Marty? I feel like they added 2 roster spots a couple years ago and maybe gave them back. The COVID years kind of messed with the rosters. What is the roster? Is it still 53?
Yeah, it is 53. The change you're thinking of, Geoff, is I think in 24 they made. So before that, you could put 2 guys. You had to carry your injured players on the final 53 if you wanted to allow them the ability to come back as an injured reserve player after 4 games. Well, that created all kinds of problems because you had to cut 2 players that you wanted to make your roster to keep those 2 guys until 2 days after the final cut down, until they cleared waivers to bring back on the active roster, and then put those 2 injured players you wanted to bring back after 4 games on injured reserve. Now what they do is they give you those 2 spots. So if there's 2 players that have injuries that will miss at least the first 4 games, you can put them on IR and designate them to return. So you are actually picking up 2 extra spots. Now, if you have more than 2 players you want to put on injured reserve, you have to make that roster spot by cutting a player, releasing a player, whatever, and then keeping that injured player on the active 53 until the other player's clear, and then you can bring him back, put him on the roster, and put the other player on injured reserve. Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a little roster shuffling there, but that makes
so
sense.
you're right. I mean,
players.
you basically added 2 roster spots.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So 53 players plus maybe a couple others depending on your injured reserve situation. So the cuts we've seen that teams trickle out 10, 15 guys, and you used to go, you'd have 90 to start camp. There was a point I think you would cut to 80 and then you cut to 53 or cut to 75 and now it's all at once. You go from 90
now
down to
it's
53.
all in one swoop.
All one swoop. So kind of walk us through the process, I think, of a general manager front office as you approach the final preseason games, and then obviously into this period where you release players and what that process is like. I'll talk about in a second, how I viewed it from a player perspective. It's obviously much different, I think, than how you see it. But sort of, how does the process begin at like a week out to preparing your roster for cut downs?
Well, actually, the process is ongoing through the whole training camp, through the whole off season. As a general manager, the general manager and the head coach are constantly talking personnel, constantly talking roster spots, talking about fits, talking about what young players are impressing. So the conversation between the coach and general manager takes place throughout the off season. Now what happens? You get a week out. Okay, so now obviously coaches are going into the head coach, going into the general manager, fighting for players that they want to keep. As a general manager, you're talking to your player personnel guys, the pro director and his assistants, and even the college director. And you're just getting opinions from them because scouts watch the preseason games and they try to watch the practice tape as much as possible. So there's communication there. Obviously, the head coach, as you know, Geoff, coaches love to meet. They go in that room and they meet for 2 hours. And I always laughed. I said, they're like amoebas coming out because they go in that room, they all talk, they all come out on the same page. So now you're getting to the final cuts. And basically what we did was I met with the personnel people. John Fox, in our case, met with the assistant coaches. I would be in there probably for the second meeting, not the first, but because they all had to get on the same page. But, John and I had a great relationship, a very honest give and take. And, by the time the 53-man cuts came, if they're easy, then you're not very good. If they're hard, you have a chance. So we would meet with the personnel people, the coaches separately, and then we would have a meeting with the coaches and the personnel people all in one room, and we'd come out with a list of the 53 players that were going to make it. I always hated today and tomorrow in this case because I don't know. It's just, you had the young players came in. These guys were given everything they had to either make the team and eventually help you win. And it was very hard for me. The personal part of it was difficult. I remember back in the 90s when I was out at the Chargers as the offensive assistant and to Bobby Bether, basically the coordinator of football operations was my title. And Rod Bernstein had been a player that gave a lot to the Chargers and had been there for a long time. We ended up cutting him. And I remember being in the elevator with him going down so he could see the trainers and the equipment guy. And he looked at me and he said, "Man, you're taking this harder than I am. Don't worry about it. It'll be all right." I felt like an idiot. Here's a guy that was just cut and he was telling me, he was trying to make me feel better. But it's an emotional time for players because some guys figure they won't get another shot and other guys thought that they were going to be able to make the team. But as you say, as you can see, it's some of the most important decisions you make during the year.
And you can feel it as a player when things start to turn a little bit. Your reps slowly get sort of cut, or you give them more reps. It gets a little bit sometimes screwy when you get more reps in the preseason and they get cut afterwards. Obviously, maybe it's because you just didn't make it and play well enough in those reps. And then also, I think for young players, it's really hard to understand what you learn as an older player that your contract status and your draft status and sort of the roster makeup matters maybe more than your play sometimes. There are times when, and you correct me if I'm wrong, like a guy is getting paid X amount of money to play, you got to keep him on the roster. You can't get rid of that player for a younger player that may be better at some point. That's why the practice squad is there. How much did you try to hide players through this process to get on the practice squad? I remember I was told by my agent my rookie season that I was not going to play in the final preseason game, which I did play one drive, to quote unquote hide me so I didn't have film. So when you guys released me, I come back to practice squad. How was that sort of talked through in the building?
I think you could have done that more maybe 15, 20 years ago, Geoff. It's hard to do now. I mean, guys are all over everything. The media is all over everything. So, it's hard to do. We would always kind of do the guys 2 days before that we really didn't think we were going to bring back on practice squad. We waited until the last day to cut the guys we wanted to bring back because we thought it would give other personnel departments less time to look at tape. But that just doesn't happen. I mean, it's hard to hide somebody to put in your practice squad that's very good, but you also have to realize that I think there's a tendency of teams to maybe put a higher value on players that have been with them through minicamp, through training camp, than maybe other teams do. Because we all forget the other teams are trying to get 53 of their players on the roster too. So, it's got to be the right guy. And there have been occasions where we've lost guys on the practice squad, but most players like to stay where they are. They like their position coach. They like the head coach. Hopefully they like the organization in the town they're in. So I think that most players would prefer to stay and sign back to the practice squad, but there's just no guarantee.
If you like what you're hearing on the GM Shuffle, is even more at VSiN Pro. Betting splits, power ratings, and sharp analysis, all for just $9.99 your first month. Go to vsin.com/subscribe and check out all the subscription options. It's funny you mentioned wanting to stay where you are, because that is a big drive for players. I know when I was a young player, the idea of staying with who drafted you and who at least put the time in to bring you into the building is a big decision. I think when it comes to practice squad, of whether or not you're going somewhere else, I have the opportunity to go somewhere else to sign in a practice squad, but you come back to where you are, at least there's a little bit of loyalty there. You think there's loyalty there. I mean, it certainly felt that way, that, the Dave Magazine, you guys were looking out for me when I got released, and the plan was to bring him back on practice squad. And so I trusted that plan and did come back on practice squad. What's the hardest part for you about cut down day? Because for me as a player, like, again, you can feel if you're being released. It's very clear. Like, if you're the third string offensive lineman, you're not making the roster. Like, you just know that. Okay. Like, it's very clear. If you're the 7th, 8th, 9th wide receiver, if you're on third string special teams, you're not making the roster. You know that. The hardest part, obviously, is if you're on that line, you're between the 8th and 9th offensive lineman. And then you start doing, Marty, and coaches tell you not to do this. You start doing the roster math in your head. You got your notebook out like this, and you're like, okay, there's 48 guys that are making the team. Is that 5th linebacker going to make it? You start marking the guys off the roster. Like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. How tough is it for you to kind of cut that final 3 guys of the roster?
Well, I think as a general manager and personnel people in general, I think the hardest thing is when you have to sacrifice a young upcoming player and maybe release him to keep a veteran, as you talked about. And, as personnel people, we're always looking to see the young guys and what they can be, right? Coaches, head coaches, position coaches, they're really there to see who you are, who helps them win the most games that year. You talk about it. How many young wide receivers, did you see get cut that led the preseason in catches? I've seen a lot over the years. It's just, you really have a hard time telling by just watching preseason games. That's why I say it's the big picture. It's the whole process. And when it comes down to cut to the 53, a position coach quite naturally is going to lean toward a veteran guy who he's had and who's done it for him than a younger player. And as a personnel, as a general manager, you have an eye on 2, 3, 4 years down the road, not just this season. You want to see guys develop and you want to see what they can be. So that's I think, natural disagreement between the coaching side and the personnel side.
I can only imagine that those fights you had with some of those coaches, those personalities about wanting to keep their own players. You don't have to name names, but I'd imagine there were coaches that you had gotten some fiery disagreements over.
Can you imagine going in the room and getting in an argument with Foxy for an hour? I mean, anybody that knows them, they'd feel sorry for me. But we did it a lot. And you know what, Geoff? That's what made us so strong, because we could go in and we could argue and he'd make fun of me, and he'd start looking at my shirt and saying, well, it's only 10 o'clock. The Hurney monogram's not there, because I'd always spill stuff on my shirt. He always called it the Hurney monogram. But, I mean, we would make fun of each other. We would disagree. Yeah. But when that door opened, we were on the same page. And I learned that from Joe Gibbs and Bobby Beathard, just watching them at the Redskins.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Back on the GM Shuffle, I am Geoff Schwartz alongside Marty Hurney. And Marty, we got news on Monday, the 25th here. The Commanders and two-time Pro Bowl receiver Terry McLaurin, 3-year extension, $96 million. I mentioned this to you in the break in your first comments, which I thought were great for a general manager, were how much guaranteed money? And the answer is, we don't know right now, but the holdout is done. Is this a deal that works for both sides?
It really is. And Geoff, we've talked about it. I think if you just look at the process of what took place with Terry McLaurin's hold in and the whole contract negotiations, both sides handled it so great. I mean, I don't think Terry McLaurin did an interview since mid-July on it, right? And he was there. He'd be seen at practice, talking to players. He even was seen talking to Adam Peters once. And I think that the way the organization handled it and the way the player handled it were perfectly. Now, Terry's agent was asking for over 30 a year, right? So he's 30 this year. He's going to be 31 next year. He's going to be 32 in the second year of the extension. So what do you do as a team? Okay. It was important for the player and the agent to have the optics of making over 30 million a year. But that's where the guarantee comes in. How much is guaranteed? What's that third year? What's that last year's salary? Is it high to kind of just jack up the average per year and make it look better as far as what the agent and the player were asking for? Terry McLaurin's in great shape. I think that 30 years old, 3 years is definitely a length that you can get 3 years out of him. And he's such an important part of this team. But I think the thing that makes you so impressed with the organization is just how they handled this whole situation. You could tell the owner, the general manager, and the head coach were all on the same page. And so was the player's agent and Terry. And this is a great deal for both sides. As a general manager, you know what I worry about the most, Geoff? Injury.
Yeah.
Guys that do not participate in training camp, I think it's about a 15% increase in their chances of being injured. So, you want to take it easy on them. You don't want to rush them back in, but you also want them to be there for the opener.
Top wide receiver average salaries. And this is average salaries, right? It's not the guaranteed money or not the length, but Jamar Chase is over 40 million. Justin Jefferson at 35. CeeDee Lamb's at 34. DK Metcalf, 33. Garrett Wilson, 32.5. And then AJ Brown and Terry McLaurin at 32 million. You mentioned something that I want to explore. So the hold-in is a new concept, right? Because in previous CBAs, you could hold out, not be there in camp. You would get fined, and you would rescind those fines as soon as the player showed up. I mean, I very rarely, I think, was a player ever had to pay the fine. Now, it might have been into a signing bonus. It might have just been like forgiven. The new CBA made the fines mandatory. I don't know why the players did this, Marty. It seems like a very dumb thing to do. I mean, I guess if the owners wanted it and you're giving them something to get something in return, this isn't the worst thing to give away because only a handful of players. And so the hold-in is new. So you're in the building, you go to meetings. I assume you lift and you do your rehab and your prehab, but you don't practice. Right. You may or may not travel to games. I know Terry McLaurin, I don't think traveled to their final preseason game. Brian Robinson Jr. did not either. Yes. We have a hold-in with Micah Parsons, who we'll get to in a second. Trey Hendrickson had a hold-out, then a hold-in. Hold-ins are new. How would you have handled a hold-in as a general manager?
I think, the way the Washington handled it was perfectly, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all, especially as a general manager. Okay. You have the owner and the head coach. The head coach, his job's to win games this year, right? And he doesn't want them holding out. He wants to get the deal done. The owner communicates with the star players. He talks to them. You never know what's going to go on at that point. Now, the owner wants to be consistent. He understands the importance of precedent, and what you do for one player kind of affects what you do for all the other players. He's very aware of that, but you're kind of you're in the middle between the owner and the head coach sometimes. It was very obvious to me that the owner Josh Harris, Adam Peters, and Dan Quinn were all on the same page, plus the agent and Terry McLaurin. They were obviously had very good communication, and I think it showed by the way this whole thing played out. As a general manager, what you're looking at is you have to look at 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and the person that's going to take most of the personnel puzzle in 2 years is Jane Daniels, right? I mean, I would think after 26, they're going to come in and try to extend him, and he's going to take almost 20% of your salary cap. Now you have your left tackle and your center who probably take up 15 to 20% of that. So, the room runs out very quickly. But the way the Commanders handled this showed that they had an eye on the future, but they knew how to handle a difficult situation as good as they could.
A team that appears to not handle a situation at all in the way they should is the Dallas Cowboys, Marty. Micah Parsons still not with an extension. And look, I just for the life of me, Marty, I don't get it. Like, there's nothing about Micah Parsons that I would have any hesitation about paying long-term. First of all, the numbers show when he is on the field, the Cowboys are number one in expected points added. So efficiency, essentially, right? Number one in the NFL when he is on the field defensively. When he's off the field, about 1,000 snaps, they're 31st. So he's that big of a difference. When you go up to game plan on a Wednesday, when you show up for that first game plan meeting, every coach does the same thing. They put up a list of players who are game wreckers, essentially, right? And they say, these are the guys you have to make sure where they are on the field every play. Offense, defense, and rarely special teams. But like, Parsons is number one on every board who's playing the Cowboys. Number one player you have to watch out where he is every single play. He is an absolute game wrecker. And I get he does a podcast and maybe you question his leadership. I get those things. He's also young. Like, he can grow into being a more mature player at some point. But the fact is, or more mature person, or maybe a better leader. But the fact is, he is a player that is a difference maker. And I'm watching the Netflix documentary right now on the Cowboys. It's great. It's fantastic. One thing you notice is they have all the best football players. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, the entire offensive line, Charles Haley, Deion Sanders. Yeah, that works, right? When you have the best players. And Micah Parsons is one of those better players, and Jerry is refusing to do a deal with him for this obtuse thing about how he negotiated a contract with Parsons privately, and then his agent wants to get involved, which is why his agent is paid to get involved and be the person who leads this. And now he won't talk to his agent, Marty. This reeks of just incompetence, and it reeks of why the Cowboys have been stagnant for 30 years now. Pay the damn player, man. Pay him.
It's become personal, Geoff. It's exactly the opposite of how we explain the Commanders situation. And listen, this is the problem with when an owner sits down with a player, thinks he's got a connection with them, and tries to negotiate the contract with the player. There isn't an agent in this league that's going to let that happen. And, we always told players, Geoff, that the agent works for you. You don't work for the agent. But as a player, I'd be interested, what's your impression when somebody says that?
That the agent works for who?
That the agent works for you, the player. The player does not work for the agent. So what Jerry Jones is saying is, hey, Micah, you and I sat down, we made a deal. You work for him. Don't do this.
No,
that's not the case.
No, it's not the case. And here's the thing. I also take offense. I mean, I don't take offense. I'm not in the contract negotiation, but I get why Parsons takes offense to Jerry basically thinking he's dumb enough to agree to a deal without his representation there. And there are certain players who don't have representation. I get that. But Parsons very clearly has representation. And the fact that Jerry Jones refuses to even talk to his agent, we have a deal done. You might have talked parameters. I don't know. Parsons said that you sort of talked about it in a meeting. He said I went there to talk about it, my leadership, which is a good topic I think that Parsons should explore. And we talked a little bit about the contract, and Jerry thinks we agreed to it. I didn't agree to anything. Jerry's trying to do this the good old boy routine. I shook his hand. It's a deal. Marty, how often did Mr. Richardson essentially did he do deals with players and then you had to pick up the pieces? I guess I don't know. This feels very uncommon though.
Never. I tell you now, the communication between Mr. Richardson and me and the head coach was very good. You always knew where he stood, right? But he let the general manager do his job, and that is negotiating a contract with the agent. You know, one of your biggest concerns when you're negotiating contracts as a general manager are the assistant coaches, the head coach. Are people going and talking to the player, saying things they shouldn't say, which gets back to the agent, which makes it harder to get a deal done? This Cowboys thing's all that on steroids. I mean, it's just, I'd shake my head. I don't know how anybody could think that they were going to get a deal done like that. If Micah Parsons is representing himself, that's fine. But he's got an agent, and he's got a reputable agent. And he's just not going to let that happen. So now it's become personal. You have Micah Parsons scrubbing his social media accounts and laying on the trainer's table during a preseason game, not wearing a jersey. I mean, it's such a distraction. I don't know. How much does that affect the locker room, Geoff?
I think for Parsons, it affects it a lot because of who he is as a player. If it's someone else, probably not. But because look, the players, Marty, we know who's good and who's not good. Like, we get it, and we also know when sometimes the owner is involved a little too much. I mean, we could talk about 2010 for many episodes if we wanted to, but like you know when the owner's too involved in roster decisions and when it hurts your chance to win. In the end, okay, I've said this many years. I'll repeat it many times as we do this show. In the end, all we care about as players is winning football games because that's what gets us paid. Okay, we don't care who you date, how much you party, honestly, how you work out. If you show up on Sunday and you help us win football games, you're done. You're not right. Like, so the players want Parsons there because guess what? He helps them win football games. That's why they want him there. And I imagine they like him as a teammate. He seems very friendly. He seems very attuned with who he is, like all the other things that matter, of course. But they want him in the building because they want to win football games. If you're Brian Schottenheimer, imagine you're first-year head coach. It's your first opportunity to be a head coach. You want him in the building to help you win football games. You mentioned the 15% injury rate when guys don't practice in camp. That's a problem. You need Parsons to play. We talked about that earlier. So I hope it gets done soon. It feels like it may be going there as we see McLaurin get done now. All right, coming up next, we'll talk some trades, some Matt Stafford, and the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings Network.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We're back on the GM Shuffle. Marty, Hurney, I'm Geoff Schwartz. We're working our way through some of the transactions and news and notes and holdouts and hold-ins and what's happened in the National Football League from my perspective as a former player, from Marty's perspective as a former general manager and front office personnel director. One more hold-in is happening in Cincinnati. Trey Hendrickson, very simply, it's very simple. He wants a second year guaranteed, right? A lot of players want that second year guaranteed. Some get 2.5 years guaranteed. Very rarely do they get 3 years guaranteed, but 2 years is standard for most players of his ilk. He is a player who's been very consistent, double-digit sacks, 17.5, 2 straight years. He had one down year in the middle of basically five good years where he was a little bit hurt, but otherwise, Marty, 13.5 sacks, 14.5 sacks, 17.5 sacks, like a player of mass production who's also 30. The Bengals are sticking to what they have done in the past. What do you make of that situation right now?
Well, it's a good comparison to compare it against the Commanders and the Cowboys, you know, and we mentioned how well the Commanders handled the Terry McLaurin situation. The Bengals are consistent, right? And we talk about precedent, the kind of precedent you set for the players in the locker room. Everybody knows what to expect when you're dealing with the Bengals in a contract negotiation. They have a organization where Duke Tobin does a great job as the personnel guy as far as putting the pieces together, making sure they all fit the blueprint, making sure that all the signings, everything they do has a reason. But then Mike Brown, Katie Brown, his daughter, they have had a way of negotiating contracts, very similar way ever since they owned the team, I think, probably back to Paul Brown. And they are going to be very tough in negotiations. But you know that. It's not personal. It's about guaranteed money. And I think numbers can always be worked out. If that's the problem in the contract, I think the dollars can all be worked out. Obviously, he's an extremely important fit to a team that really needs so much help on defense, Geoff. I kind of said I think the Bengals are a great over the total team all year because I'm not sure the lines can keep up with it. They're going to score a ton of points, and I think they're going to give up a ton of points.
Yeah, the Bengals to me are a no playoff team. I bet them to miss the playoffs, Marty. I mean, think about this, right? If I told you that a team with a bottom 5 offensive line and a bottom 5 defense, you'd be like, no playoffs, automatically, no playoffs, right?
Exactly.
Add in the tough division. Now, Joe Burrow is fantastic. I'm a Chiefs fan, of course, but I think we all agree Mahomes is number one. I mean, Burrow's 1B, 1C with Josh Allen. Like, I think that's sort of where those
Yep.
he's an incredible football
Yep.
player, but he gets hit way too much. It's not his fault, but his offensive line is not very good, and they continue to have issues up there. And the defense stinks, which again leads to your point, high scoring games. Do you think the Bengals should break precedent for like what's the break point here? Who wins out? Do the Bengals break precedent here? Or does Trey Henderson just come back because he doesn't want to lose out on money every week?
I don't think they break precedent, Geoff. I think that they'll probably try to make another move just to give him something to come in, but they believe in what they believe, right? So you're not going to see a lot of swings with them. They're not going to change and all of a sudden go from no guaranteed money in the second year from the whole year guaranteed. They're not going to do that. That's just not the way they do business. But that they're consistent and you know how they operate. So the Bengals have always been known as a very tough team to negotiate contracts with, but everybody knows that, and I think this will be worked out.
So what is the end result? Like what's the answer for to make Trey Hendrickson happy? Is it more average per year? Is it owner structure? Like how do you make him happy?
I think you hit it on the head, Geoff. I think he wants a second year guarantee. I mean, I think that listen, players can be cut, and if it's not guaranteed, it's a one way contract. So I think he wants more guaranteed money, and I would think that there will be some movement, probably from both sides, to reach an agreement. But I do think that Cincinnati will reach an agreement sometime, hopefully this week, hopefully before the opener. But they're gonna stick to their beliefs.
Yeah, they need him back in the worst way. Last on him
They do.
before we move on to some injuries and trade talk. He's 30 now, and I think that for a while, right, 30 was the age when things started going downhill. But with
Right.
players just so much better now at preparing their bodies, at eating and fueling, at rehabbing and prehabbing, all those things, practice less double days, less hitting, Marty. Do teams have to recalibrate the way they think about older players? I certainly do, right? I mean, 30 was like the cutoff, right? It was like 30 years old, you start going, I know I did not, I'm obviously not as good as anything, but it feels like, a hesitation to pay an older player. You mentioned McLaurin, 30, 31, 32, Henderson's at 30. These guys play longer than ever. Like the top guys for a long time now. Is there an age concern here for you with Hendrickson?
It's right on the borderline at defensive end. I do think it depends on positions, Geoff. Like offensive linemen, shoot, you guys can play till 36, 37, right? The top guys. I mean, the
Yeah.
top tackles and especially the tackles. I think that, that's a position that you can get more out, probably the most out of older players. And, I think that's one thing the Commanders were looking at on the Terry McLaurin thing is they picked up Laramie Tunsil in a trade, and he's up after 26, and they're looking probably at extending him for a good bit of time. So I do think you have to be careful about age, and the one thing you have to be very cautious of is paying a player for what he's done in the past, not what you think he's going to do for you in the present and the future. And I think that in Terry McLaurin's case, the 3-year length was perfect. And, I mean, if you say in the second year of that extension, he's 32. Okay, there's no reason to think that his production's going to fall off a lot. Now you're going to 33, but a 3-year deal was the perfect length for him. So I think you do have to be cognizant of the age of players, especially in certain positions. And it's also, as you say, how well do they take care of themselves?
Yeah, I think players just do a better job of that now, and I think you guys can feel that from the front office, just players being in better shape. I mean, there's no offseason program anymore. I mean, these guys have to come in shape, but not used to be the case. Jerry Simmons, man, March 15th, you were working out with him, and you didn't have to be in shape. You show up, I mean, in reasonable shape, but you didn't have to be in shape. Now guys have to be in shape in April, and there's so much more that goes into the preparation for that. One guy that might be in bad shape is Matt Stafford right now, Marty. I'm a guy who's had a back injury before. I think I still have a back injury. Maybe all former offensive linemen have back injuries, but he is still not practicing. I'm terribly concerned. He went to see a specialist in Robert Watkins, who's like the number one back guy in Los Angeles. I don't like hearing that. It does feel like this is a legit problem. It's a pain management issue, Marty. How concerned are you for Matt Stafford's health this season?
Well, it's a disc. And you know what jumped out to me, Geoff, is he didn't get on the plane and fly with the team to the last preseason game in Cleveland. Okay. So here's a guy, 37 years old. You're counting on him to be your starter this year. And a lot of people think they have a chance to be a real force in the NFC if he stays healthy. And he can't even get on the plane to go to Cleveland. Obviously, a lot of it is being very cautious, but it really concerns me. I mean, I think it's a disc in the back from what I read, and those things are very difficult to get past, as you know.
Yeah, and the sitting is the worst thing on the airplane for a disc too. So
Exactly.
that makes that comes with the idea that maybe they're trying to get it. But I mean, he to my knowledge, he hasn't practiced really much yet, right, Marty? So
No,
they play
no, he has
in
not.
2 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks from yesterday. How concerned are you for the Rams season if Stafford hasn't done anything yet?
Well, I think he starts in the opener, right? This is a longevity thing to me. I think it's a pretty good bet to say that he's going to miss some time at some point during this season. Okay, whether it's he gets a hit in the first game, but he's going to get hit, and you get hit on that back. I mean, it's going to be an issue all year. It's something that the trainers have to have daily maintenance on, but I just think it's a real concern for the Rams.
So Jimmy G is their backup. Do you think they make a move here to secure another quarterback? We've seen some quarterback movement with Tanner McKee, who's probably out for Philly for a little bit of time, and there was a trade to bring Sam Howell to Philly. There's other quarterbacks maybe available that are sort of maybe higher upside than Jimmy G, or the Rams just sit tight with Jimmy G for now.
Well, it's funny. We say, what comes around goes around. Sam Howell was traded to Philadelphia because Minnesota signed Carson Wentz. Obviously, they were both here together in Washington in 23. But I think that Sean McVay is probably comfortable with Jimmy G. Listen, the old saying, if you have two, you don't have any. So if you're getting your second quarterback, if you're getting your backup, it's not ideal. And are the Rams going to win the NFC without Matt Stafford? Probably not, right? So, and I'm sure Sean McVay has plans to try to keep him healthy. Maybe be more conservative early. I don't know, but it's certainly something that they have to have Matt Stafford on the field to win the type of games that they want to win this year. And it's nothing against Jimmy G whatsoever. It's just you get to number two, and it's number two.
I agree with you. I've unfortunately had experience playing with backup quarterbacks. It's a much different life, man. And Stafford's just so good. I mean, his ability to just see the entire field, his arm talent still has not wavered at all over his career. He doesn't move as well anymore, but when you see the field and process that quickly, really doesn't bother you. So have you changed at all your NFC West hierarchy? I think Niners are not better than the Rams, but their schedule is pretty simple. I think it still goes Niners, Rams for me. Stafford's out, then maybe Seattle moves up to 3. Moves up to 2.
See, I think Philadelphia and Washington and Green Bay are the 3 best teams, okay, in the NFC. The thing that gives me pause on the Commanders and even the Eagles is the schedule. I mean, the NFC East plays the NFC North and the AFC West. That's an extremely difficult schedule. So we'll see. I think Green Bay's got a real chance.
We'll talk more about our division previews as we head into the NFL season next week. A fun first episode, Marty. Very much enjoyed kicking it with you, and we'll be here on Mondays and Thursdays moving forward. as we hit the football season, get our perspective as a former player, a former general manager. We'll talk all things National Football League. That is it for us today. It for the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings Network.